All right, what's going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Time Out with Doc and Caveman. As always, you are here with Dr. Fantasy and my co host, the Fantasy Caveman. We are continuing to roll on with our NBA team previews. Today, we're going to be talking about the Washington Wizards, and I may have some surprises up my sleeve for this episode. So stay tuned for that, and make sure you guys subscribe. We still got tons of teams to analyze here, so make sure you don't miss out on any of that. You can subscribe on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. But let's jump into recapping the Wizards season last year. They were 34 and 38, which was good for 8th in the Eastern Conference under then head coach Scott Brooks. And ironically enough, we're recording 3 episodes today, and all 3 teams switched head coaches. So that's kind of interesting. We're at that point in the standings where there are teams that were towards the bottom of the playoff conversation, and there are teams that are looking to take that next step forward. So, I kind of an interesting point that we're at right now. A few stats from last season. They were 17th in offensive rating, 19th in defensive rating. They did allow the most points per game, though. So,
Oh,
although they were,
really?
yeah, I know, shocking. And they scored the 3rd most points in the league.
Oh,
So,
really?
just not at an efficient clip, which is also, really not surprising because of some guy that we're going to have to talk about. Not really that much because he's not on the team anymore, so
Yep.
that's nice. But a few other random stats. They had the 5th worst 3-point percentage. They were 9th in rebounding, which isn't surprising given Russell Westbrook rebounds well for his position. Once again, another team that didn't have a lot of size, but everybody rebounded really well for their position. And then they were kind of middle of the pack and everything else in terms of 3-point percentage allowed. They weren't very good defending in the post. They were better on the perimeter. So they kind of were average in a lot of other categories. So let's go over some of their season leaders. Bradley Beal led the way in points with 31.3. Russell Westbrook at 22.2. Thomas Bryant then at 14.3. Rebounds, Russell Westbrook 11.5. Thomas Bryant at 6.1. Assists, Russell Westbrook at 11.7. Bradley Beal was actually second at 4.4. Steals, Russell Westbrook at 1.4 and Bradley Beal at 1.2. And then blocks, not Russell
And
Westbrook.
not Russell Westbrook.
Daniel Gafford at 1.8 and Alex Len with 1. So, K-Man, anyone stand out to you on the Wizards roster from last year?
I mean, man, Russell Westbrook. I mean, not no, not. I mean, obviously, this is gonna kind of. This is I'm keeping with my thing with these people that impress me. I don't like including guys that are no longer on the team. So, luckily for you, I'm not gonna talk about how great Russell Westbrook is.
Thank goodness.
But I'm just gonna go with the next best thing on the Wizards and talk about Bradley Beal. Because the reality is, a lot of the knock on Bradley Beal is that he's not incredibly efficient. And that's kind of been, what people say about him. He's a pure, volume shooter. While he didn't shoot great from 3, he was right around 35%. He did shoot almost 49% from the field. So for a guy who, when we're talking about being their number one and really only real consistent offensive scorer, because Russell Westbrook, as great as Russell Westbrook is far from a consistent shooter on the offensive end. So Bradley Beal, considering the amount that he had to do, was pretty impressive, and I think if he wasn't a superstar before last year, he is now. He's a superstar. The argument against him being a superstar is going to be his efficiency, which I think, given the situation, he was very efficient last season. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. And overall, I mean, I'm sure you have a couple of guys, and not that everybody played bad for them, but I just think, since I can't talk about Russell Westbrook, I'm gonna just go with Bradley Beal, because I think he validated my opinion that I've had of him all along, that he is a superstar player.
Yeah, and I think he definitely was efficient. I don't think that's a stretch at all. I mean, he did shoot 48.5% from the field, which was a career high for him, which, like you said, is impressive considering the usage that he had. Was slightly below 35% from three, so a little below the league average, but not bad. And then he shot almost 89% from the free throw line with almost 8 attempts a game. So we have a combination, once again, of volume and efficiency there. So, the other thing that I thought was interesting was that his turnovers numbers went down compared to the previous season. So I thought he was making better decisions than he had in the past.
It's because Russell Westbrook had all the turnovers.
Yeah, Russell Westbrook turns over the ball enough for 5 teams. So Bradley Beal couldn't really afford to do that. But, I actually agree with you that on the whole, it was really disappointing because I think they have some young guys that you wanted to see more from. Like, I like what I saw from Thomas Bryant when he was healthy. Not a great defender, but he's a big that can stretch the floor, shot 40% from 3-point range, a good rebounder, but he kind of didn't show anything extra compared to what he showed the year before.
Yeah.
And you're looking for development and for guys to go, okay, he's been a good role player and now he's showing the ability to be more than that. And I feel the same way with Rui Hachimura as well. Every year I feel like people are like, this guy's going to be a superstar. He has all the ability in the world. And don't get me wrong, he still has potential. He's still only 23, so I'm not giving up on the guy, but he averaged, once again, back-to-back seasons, over 30 minutes, and he's been a great defender, and I'm not going to take that away from him, but offensively, I just want to see more from him. I haven't been impressed, and I don't think he's taken over that role of being a consistent top offensive option. I think we're at a point where maybe he's just a really strong 3-and-D player for you. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I think I was disappointed that I didn't see more development from Rue. I think that's what we were looking for last season. There wasn't as much pressure on him. And I think with that, usually you see some players develop more because, they kind of have, without that pressure on them, they can kind of just allow their game to develop and work on their craft rather than saying, I got to produce now at any cost. So I think to me that was still disappointing that Rue didn't show more. So it's kind of weird for me if I'm looking at like, oh, who impressed me? I don't know. I think I was just disappointed with their lack of development from some of these young players.
I know he's a rookie last season. I would have liked to see more from Denny Avdia as well. And he didn't. I mean, he didn't. He wasn't like terrible. It's just one of those where, I would have liked to see him take a good stride in his first season. And I don't think he really did that.
Yeah, the guy that I did want to mention that I don't want to say impressed, but he was very good. He only played 23 minutes at the end of the year for him because he was acquired from the Bulls. But Daniel Gafford, who's a 22-year-old big for him, actually averaged 10 points and 5.5 rebounds with 1.8 blocks in only 17 minutes. I mean, those are incredibly efficient numbers for only playing 17 minutes. So that's a guy that could see himself into the lineup a lot more consistently, and I think he can do a lot more with even more minutes. So if anything, I think that's an interesting name to keep an eye on.
That's the problem with this team is that we're talking, and I totally agree with you with Gafford, but we're talking about a guy that had barely played for him last.
Yeah.
It's kind of like nobody really. It was just overall very like disappointing from not like players were disappointing, but like you said, more disappointing from like a player development standpoint.
Yeah, and I think the most disappointing part is Scott Brooks has been kind of known for developing young players, so I think that's one of the reasons he was brought in, if we're being honest about it. So I think that's definitely a disappointing tenure for Scott Brooks there in Washington. So let's go over their offseason acquisitions and losses. They had 2 draft picks, Corey Kispert, 15th overall, and then Isaiah Todd, 31st overall. They did have quite a few. They actually had a semi-busy offseason, if we're being honest about it. Not super busy, but they've definitely made some moves. Their new head coach is Wes Unseld Jr., which I'll talk a little bit about. They also acquired Contavious Caldwell-Pope, Spencer Dinwiddie, Montrezl Harrell, Aaron Holiday, Kyle Kuzma, all names that people are familiar with. And then they lost a few players as well, Russell Westbrook Ish Smith, Robin Lopez, Alex Len, Chandler Hutchinson, Isaac Bonga, all guys that played solid minutes for him last season. So what do you think about this offseason as a whole, Caveman?
You forgot about Sam Decker as well.
Oh, I'm so
You got
sorry.
him every time. You
Represent.
keep getting him. He is very important.
Okay, he's very important.
But honestly, the big thing with this offseason was that move on from Russell Westbrook after only one season shipping him off to LA. I mean, I know you don't like to talk about Russell Westbrook, but that's kind of the biggest thing they did this offseason. I think considering the situation, I really do like the return they got for him. I think that was a very fair package for both sides. So I like the pack. I like the return they got. I think Kyle Kuzma and the other guy they got, Caldwell Pope. Wow, I blanked on his name already. That's sad.
Maybe they didn't get a good return then.
Yeah, they did. I mean, no, they got a good return. I was like blanking on another name for some reason. I don't know. But like I especially love there's Corey Kispert is the perfect fit for this system. Now, Corey Kispert isn't a great defender, but I'm interested to see with like you said with Wes Unseld, the new head coach, how he's gonna use a guy like Kispert, because had this still been Scott Brooks, I think it would have been much more clear on what Kispert's role would have been. But with Wes Unseld now, I'm intrigued at what kind of role he's gonna have, and Isaiah Todd is another. It's gonna be, considering the really lack of the lack of star power at the big man position for him. I think Isaiah Todd's a guy that can possibly develop into becoming something as well. But overall, I'm a little sad for them, because we'll talk about this as we'll talk about this when we see about where they're going to finish next season. But overall, I get it, but I honestly don't love it because I think they're going to be worse. So we'll see.
So, I'll tell you why I love this offseason. So when you're looking at the Wizards last season, what were their two biggest weaknesses? 3-point shooting and playing any sort of defense, which is pretty common for any Russell Westbrook led team. And what two? Yeah, I did. Shots fired. But when you look at this offseason, what are the two biggest things they addressed? 3-point shooting and defense. And I think they filled a lot of the holes that they needed to fill. And they were the 8th seed last year. And I'm going to be crazy here. I think that they're better without Russell Westbrook. I think that the pieces that they replaced him with can make up for what he provided offensively, and I think they're going to be much, much better defensively. So if you even take, we'll say, Spencer Dinwiddie and Kyle Kuzma combined, I think they can make up for the scoring that Russell Westbrook provided. Now, I understand that's two guys making up for one, but I think that they can make up for that scoring. It's not going to be as much on two guys, Bradley Beal and Westbrook, as it can be more spread out between 5 or 6 plus guys now, and I'll talk about their depth when we get to their depth chart. But I like what they did. I think you can at least see the direction that they're going in and what they're going for. And when you look at Wes Unseld as well, I really like Wes Unseld, and I really like the Nugget system that he came from with Michael Malone. And this was an interesting stat. Every year Wes Unseld was a top assistant under Malone. They were a top 6 defensive team, the Nuggets. So this is a guy that's coming in. He's going to want his guys to play tough defensively. I actually was, when doing some research for this, Jamal Murray, Jokic, and Michael Porter credited Wes Unseld specifically for a lot of their development. So I thought that was kind of interesting. They weren't necessarily calling out Michael Malone for being responsible for their development. I think he's put that defensive system in place, but a lot of their specific development they credited to Wes Unseld Jr. So I really like this hire. I think it's one of those hires that's gone under the radar. And we've had some big name coaches that have gotten jobs, and people want to talk about Rick Carlisle, who I still think is probably the best hire, and Jason Kidd getting a job. But at the end of the day, I think Wes Unseld's going to be one of the most underrated hires from this offseason. And I love what they did. I really do. And we'll go over the depth chart and start talking about their future right now. So, depth chart in the backcourt, Spencer Dinwiddie and Bradley Beal. Behind them, Caldwell Pope. Corey Kispert's listed at the 2 and 3. Aaron Holiday coming off the bench as well. Raul Neto, who's played some minutes for him off the bench as well. Then at the 3, they have a lot of guys that can play here, if we're being honest about it. They have Kuzma and Davis Bertrands, who we haven't mentioned, but is an elite 3-point shooter. Corey Kispert, Denny Avdia, and then at the 4, they have Ru Hachimura. Kuzma's listed as the backup, and then Avdia. I think a lot of those guys we just mentioned at the 3 are going to be playing the 4 as well. And then at the 5, they have Montrezl Harrell, who they acquired. Daniel Gafford and Thomas Bryant, who is injured right now. I read a report earlier today, actually, that he's starting to do explosive workouts. So it seems like he's approaching coming back and playing. But what do you think about this depth chart as a whole?
It's definitely an interesting one. Raul Neto is a guy I became very familiar with. You know, he was a popular streamer last season. When you talk about fantasies, he was a popular guy to pick up whenever Russell Westbrook was being rested. He was kind of the guy you wanted when Russell Westbrook was out. But yeah, I didn't mention Spencer Dinwiddie when I talked about their acquisitions, but I think he also is going to be he's going to kind of be the quote unquote replacement for Russell Westbrook. So that'll be interesting to see how he works with Bradley Beal in that backcourt. Overall, solid depth. You mentioned everybody they have that can play the wing position. I mean, they literally have like 6 or 7 guys that can play the wing. They're gonna be very versatile. Is kind of my big thing with this as well. Everybody, even Spencer Dinwiddie, who's like 6'5", 6'6".
Yep.
He could even theoretically play some the wing as well. Just they have so much length. I don't know how much it's going to translate, as we'll talk about, but I do think they have really solid depth all around. The Montrezl Harrell, great signing as well. So overall, solid depth and really nothing to complain about from that perspective.
Yeah, so when you're looking at it as a whole, I think that this is a team that's built on 3-and-D players and Bradley Beal. I mean, that's kind of how it's built at this point, and I don't hate it if we're being honest about it. And I think there's the biggest concern I have is actually in their backcourt. As much as they have names, once again, I bring it up with every team, but who's handling the ball on their second unit here? I mean, are they going to rely on Avdia being more of a playmaker on that second unit? If he develops, I could definitely see that being the case, but that's to be determined at this point. But I think it's well-rounded. I think that Corey Kispert could be an elite shooter in the NBA. You have Davis Bertrands, who's an elite shooter, but then you have guys like Caldwell Pope who can make up for it defensively. Hachimura, Spencer Dinwiddie wasn't great defensively coming back, some people were worried about him defensively coming off the injury, but early in his career, he was a really, really good defender, and he lost a little bit of that as he's been required to do more on the offensive end. But I think people forget before last season, he averaged 20 points for him in 2019, 2020. This is a guy everyone was picking to be the 6th man of the year and a potential borderline all-star player for the Nets until he went down and until they brought in other pieces. So I think some people forget the kind of upside that Spencer Dinwiddie has, but I think as a whole, I agree. The versatility is a big piece of it. When we're talking about who's backing up the 3 or 4, it really doesn't matter in this case because they're kind of going to all rotate everywhere. But they also have that nice mix, especially when Thomas Bryant comes back, of having a solid rotation in the front court as well at the 5 with Harrell, Bryant, and Gafford. That's pretty nice depth there. So my only concern is who's going to develop into that primary ball handler on the second unit. But we've seen Avdia has that kind of playmaking ability. If he can take the next step forward, which we've seen Jokic become more and more of a playmaker with Wes Unseld. So is that a kind of a jump we could see in the next few years from Avdia?
You're saying Denny Avdia is going to be as good as Nikola Jokic?
No, I think he's going to be better.
Ooh, that's
No,
bold.
I'm just kidding. I didn't even like Avdia coming out, but I think Wes Unseld could definitely help him in his development. So in terms of where we see them finishing, I'm going to go, I guess I'll say the bold part first, and then you're going to say something chalk, like they're going to be one of the bottom few teams in the Eastern Conference, and that's okay. But I think that this team could be everything that the Knicks were last season. I really think that they could be, and I know Wes Unseld hasn't run a team before, but I think that he's going to be a really high level head coach, and I'm glad that he got an opportunity. But I think they're not going to be the worst defensive team in the league, I can tell you that much. But based on what they did offensively last year, being a top 3 team in terms of points per game, I think that they can still be a top 10 offensive team with Bradley Beal. And I think at the worst case scenario, this is a middle of the road defensive team. You see them finish, 14, 15 in that range. And in that case, if they're playing solid defensively, they have better 3-point shooting, they have a superstar player to build around, they have great role players that can play solid defensively. I think they have some depth that I like. I think they have a lot of the elements to make the playoffs. And I'll say that I mean, it's not crazy to say that they'll be a top 10 seed because of the play-in tournament now, but I haven't seen one other person say that they're going to be a top 10 seed and that they'll be competing for a playoff spot. But I'll go out and say that I think they're going to be a playoff team next year. I like how they're constructed. I like what they've done. I like the opportunity, and we didn't even really talk about it with Kyle Kuzma, who wants to be a superstar. I'm not saying he's going to be a superstar, but he has a lot to prove. He's one of those guys. I think he does have a chip on his shoulder, and I think he wants to prove he's at least better than what he's shown. And I don't think he's going to be an all-star or superstar, but he's a guy. Could he average 16 plus points with the minutes that he's going to play? Potentially. So I think he's going to be a valuable role player. And I like the depth, 3-point shooting, the defense of minded players they've brought in. I think Spencer Dinwiddie's a great hustle guy, and he brings a lot of energy to a team. So I like the way they're constructed, and I'm going to say that they're going to be a playoff team this year.
That's kind of that certainly is one way to go about it. The reality is, as much as we hate on Russell Westbrook, I don't think you'll be able to. I think what he brings is going to be hard to replace. I mean, now you look at this team, they don't really have a really good playmaker right now. Mm-hmm. Who is going to, as much as Russell Westbrook, in my opinion, is an elite playmaker. Mm-hmm. He knows how to set up his teammates. He knows how to get his teammates looks. They don't have that right now, which to me is the biggest concern. It's not their defense. Their defense, I agree, it can't get worse. They brought in guys that could play defense, so logically that would tell you that they're going to be better defensively. But I'm very concerned about who's going to set everybody up and who's going to be that primary playmaker. Because you look at the team, I mean, that's not really Spencer Dinwiddie's game, really. Bradley Beal is still going to need to be their primary scorer. So I don't think you can really throw playmaking on to Bradley Beal as well. That's not really his strength. Are you relying on Denny Avdia a lot to take a huge jump year 2? I mean, that's kind of my biggest thing with them. They're going to be fine defensively. They're going to be able to score as well. They have a bunch of guys that can shoot the 3, but I think what's going to plague them is how you going to get all these shooters their looks. These guys can shoot, but not a lot of these guys can shoot and create for themselves. And I think that's going to be a huge problem for them. I don't see a path to the playoffs. Like you said, I'm gonna be with the majority, 99% of the population. that says they're not going to make the playoffs. They're not going to be. I don't think they're going to be the worst team in the Eastern. I still think that's going to be the Orlando Magic. I will say that I don't. I will say that will 100% be my prediction that the Orlando Magic will be last in their conference. But they're going to be somewhere from 11 to 14. I don't see them making the. I mean, I hope I'm wrong because I love Bradley Beal. He's a superstar. I like where they're trying to go. I just think it's going to be a huge problem that they don't have a primary playmaker on their team, and that's kind of my thought. That's kind of my thought process. What is your thinking about that? The fact that they really don't have that primary playmaker on their squad.
Yeah, I think a lot's going to be on Spencer Dinwiddie to prove he can be that. He averaged almost 7 assists before the injury, so he's a guy that's shown some playmaking ability. And I mean, I think that we haven't even seen the best of Spencer Dinwiddie. We haven't quite seen him in a situation like this either. So if Dinwiddie and Avdia can be two playmakers, both in the starting unit and then off the bench, I think that it's not going to be Russell Westbrook level, but if they can at least get those shooters their open looks, then I think that's really the goal at the end of the day. So, yeah, is it going to be as ideal as it was last season? Definitely not, but I do think that they have some guys that can. They have some. We're going to be depending. They're going to be depending on that growth in order for them to be successful. So that definitely, I think that's a very fair point.
Yeah, Dinwiddie, you see, he averaged a decent amount of assists. It's going to be unsure how he's going to do now that teams know he's the primary play. He's going to have to be a primary playmaker. How that's going to change his game. We'll have to do kind of a big wait and see approach.
For sure. So that was one of the first times that we've kind of disagreed on
a big level, yeah. But
so that's fun.
I'm happy because I honestly wasn't expecting you to be that high on him either, but I was pleasantly surprised.
Hey, it doesn't hurt. I mean, not everybody can go chalk all the time. So, like I said, once again, I said in the last episode, but I'm excited to go over the Eastern Conference standings. So if you guys want to tune in for more future content, we're going to be providing lots heading up to the season and throughout the season. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. And we will see you guys next time for the Boston Celtics.